Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka Mono Bluetron, back again with another episode of 10-Minute Testing. So, as you may know, I consider myself to be a little bit of a Masked Hero fanboy. It's been one of my favorite decks since we were all basically collectively jerking off with Blazeman, and nobody was happier than me when Totally Awesome Heroes was suddenly a Tier 1 deck. However, ever since the release of Rate, the relative power level of cards has gone up so far that, unfortunately, making a Trito just isn't as good as it used to be. Because of this, I've been struggling to find a way to make Masked Hero great again, and I figured I'd celebrate the release of Duelist Saga by exploring one of the new tools we were given, Vision Hero Vyon. So here's the list. Now you might notice that this is like 80% just Masked Heroes, but I promise there are some interesting differences. As always, I'll explain the archetype, give you an overview of what I want the deck to do, and of course, roll through the card by card. So, first, Vision Hero is a group of monsters that are just basically more evidence that Konami won't let anything that makes them money die. It's an anime set of monsters that are finally making their way to the game, and they received their first TCG support about 5 days ago. That card, Vision Hero Vyon, is a well-typed dark monster which has two effects. One ETB effect, foolishes a hero from your deck, which becomes a Roto when combined with Shadow Mist. Additionally, he can snag a polymerization if he banishes a hero from your graveyard. Now, these are pretty good setup tools, and while people have been using him mostly to send Destiny Hero Maliciouses from their deck and make nuts setups, I'm excited to see if he has what it takes to be playable in everyone's favorite stunny archetype, Masked Heroes. So the deck combines a lot of the original tools from Turbo Make Darklaw.deck with some powerful new plays and popular old friends. One of the biggest weaknesses, in my opinion, of the Darklaw deck was that you were constantly evaluating if it was worth going into Darklaw or a Totally turn 1, and more than often you had a hand with 3 monsters that was an absolute brick and a half and you couldn't really do anything with it. This deck eschews the tin goldfishes for Vyons, assuming that polymerizing the excess monsters out of your hand to facilitate better Bubbleman plays is more powerful than relying on your deck not to brick. With 3 copies of Miracle Fusion, we more than likely can construct turns that end with several copies of Absolute Zero, even with hands that usually ended with Make, Darklaw, and Pass. So, now that I've written this deck a bunch of checks it couldn't possibly cash, next it's time to look at the individual cards. First, we have 3 copies of Vision Hero Vyon, the main man himself. Next is 3 copies of Shadow Mist, the main, a person, themselves. This card gets you a hero when it goes to the grave and a mask change when it is special summoned, but you can't get both in one turn. Next is Bubbleman, half of a tree toad, who specials if he's the only card in your hand. After that are 2 copies of Summoner Monk to get Vyon or Shadow Mist, and 1 Goblinberg. God, I wish I knew how to quit you. For spells, you can see we're playing basically everything in the kitchen sink. We have 2 copies of Polymerization, 3 copies of Miracle Fusion, which allows you to fusion summon using materials from your own graveyard, which is just completely nuts after Vyon has set up. 3 copies of E-Call, which unfortunately cannot find Vyon. 3 copies of A Hero Lives, which unfortunately cannot find Vyon. 3 Mask Change, which hilariously can change Vyon into a Darklaw. 3 Instant Fusion for, well, you guessed it, the Norden plays. 1 Foolish Burial, doing its best Vyon impression. 1 Raigeki, 1 Upstart, 1 Rhoda, and 3 Twin Twisters. We're also playing a Form Change as a fun of. We can actually morph Absolute Zero into Acid for the sweet full board wipe. For traps, I mean, we're just playing the Solemn Trio, 1 Warning and 2 Strikes. In the extra, we've got 20, what is this? Vision Hero Adoration. Oh my god. This guy can be made with 2 hero monsters and has a Dark Rebellion Xyz type effect. 2 Absolute Zero, the actually good card in the extra deck, our usual fusion target. He turns a water monster and a hero into a beatstick that destroys all of your opponent's monsters when he leaves the field. Hilariously, he can be made a multitude of different ways using a Vyon and a Bubbleman, or a Bubbleman and a Shadow Mist, or a, Bahamut Shark and a Bubbleman. I mean, there's just a multitude of ways to get this guy out. 1 copy of Acid, 1 Anarchy, and 2 Darklaws for our mask changes, 1 Norden for our instant fusion, the Utopia Suite, the Abyss Dweller for a defensive rank 4, and routinely we need to detach an Xyz material the same turn we attach it, and this is the only one that can really do that and still do things on our opponent's turn. 1 copy of Castell, and a Shark and 2 Toads. Space is super tight, and I find making the second Toad off of the same Bahamut Shark more likely than being able to actually make 2 Bahamut Sharks. So, let's jump into the games and see what happens. So our first game is up against Pendulum Graph Magicians, a deck that I'm actually not very excited to see in paper, but thankfully won't have to deal with for very long, mostly because, like all Pendulum decks, I expect it to be completely eviscerated by the Link format. We've opened all right. Like most hero hands, this contains an intricate puzzle in order to find the optimal play. I've included this non-Vyon clip as the starter just to show you the different lines that occur when you include cards like Polymerization in a hero's deck. We're going to go ahead and normal summon our masked hero Shadow Mist Man, go into Dark Law, use Shadow Mist's Grave effect in order to get ourselves a copy of Bubble Man, set 3, Special Bubble Man, flip up Instant Diffusion to get Norden, activate Norden's effect to get Shadow Mist from Graveyard, go into Bahamut Shark, go into Tree Toad, and then flip a copy of Polymerization, polymerizing the Shadow Mist and the Bahamut Shark into a copy of Absolute Zero, which remember only cares if your one monster is a hero, not your water monster. So our opponent is going to untap. This is about the best board we can make with this deck. He's going to activate Pendulum Graph of Ages. I'm like, actually, I think that's okay. After he activates Duelist Advent, I'm like, yes, this is a Dark Law effect going off right now. We nab another copy of Duelist Advent, which isn't great for us. He's going to activate a copy of Odd Eyes Fusion, and I'm like, yes, that is in fact the card that we need to take, and he concedes. Yeah, so a lot of sort of blink and you'll miss it types of games with this deck. A lot of early concessions as well. So that last game was certainly fast, but exists in order to show you the playmaking potential of this deck. I'm going to show you now a completely different hand that bricks in the entirely opposite direction. Too many Vyons instead of none at all. Additionally, I'd like to show you how including Vyon can help shore up some of this deck's worst weaknesses, most notably Kaijus, and what better way to show that than against a dedicated Kaiju strategy. So, thankfully, we do get to go first. We're going to use Vyon to send a Shadow Mist to Graveyard, which is going to get us a copy of Bubble Man. Then we will banish that Shadow Mist to get a Polymerization in our hand. Worth noting we already have a Poly, but always better to have more, I believe. Next, we're going to use the Poly to send the Vyon and the Bubble Man in our hand in order to get a copy of Absolute Zero. After that, we can instant fuse our way into a Norden, which can get back the Bubble Man that is currently in the graveyard. That makes us a copy of Bahamut Shark we can detach for Tree Toad, and then of course we can use this emergency call for another copy of Bubble Man, special summon him, and go into Abyss Dweller. So we don't have a copy of Dark Law on board, but instead we have a Absolute Zero, an Abyss Dweller, a Tree Toad, and a Bahamut Shark, all of which are gaining massive attack boosts due to Abyss Dweller having a water monster as a material. So I'm feeling okay about this game. Our opponent is going to lead off with the Terraforming and then play Kyoto Waterfront. I recognize this right off the bat as something I'm going to have to negate, so we're going to use Tree Toad to negate that. Then afterwards, we're going to return this Bubble Man to our hand and get our Absolute Zero tributed for a copy of Gamciel that triggers Absolute Zero's effect and destroys absolutely nothing. He's going to summon Dagorin and then attack into the Abyss Dweller. I will use Abyss Dweller's effect and then, take 800 because I don't have another option, and he ends his turn. I'm still feeling all right. We're going to use Bahamut Shark to make Tree Toad, and then normal summon this Summoner Monk we rip off the top, special summon this Bubble Man, go into Utopia, and I'm pretty sure this is close to game. We'll make the Lightning attack for 5,000 points of damage, and then I'll attack with Gamciel, and wouldn't you know it, it's Mirror Force, so suddenly I'm out 2,200 points of damage. Let's go ahead and negate that. We'll take it as well. I would really like a copy of Mirror Force. Then we'll add this Bubble Man back to hand. Our opponent is going to go ahead and normal summon, or special summon rather, this Kumungus. We will Mirror Force it just because I don't really want something else of mine to get Kaiju'd, and then in main phase 2 he will special summon this Thunder King. I'm feeling okay because the set card is Polymerization, so I'm able to flip up this Poly and Poly the Gamciel and the Bubble Man into an Absolute Zero, attack into the Thunder King, take 300, trigger Absolute Zero's effect, and then attack for lethal amounts of damage. So our third match is up against Paleo Frogs, and we've drawn the green hand. This is all big money. We don't have any creatures, which is a little bit of a problem, except we do have a Hero Lives and the emergency call, so while we can't open with some sort of busted-ass Vyon setup, we can open with the classically busted dank hero Dark Law setup. I have the opportunity to go for a longer, more risky play that doesn't use Shadow Mist effect to get a copy of Mask Change to our hand, but I decline to do so because I also think a similar blowout in a lot of cases is Mask Changing an already used Dark Law to strip 2 cards out of our opponent's hand, so I'm hoping that I can just get him with that. I'll Mask Change during draw step just because I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of cards in this game that say send to the graveyard as a cost, and I want to make sure he can't activate them. We're going to get a copy of Vision Hero Vyon, just because we don't have really great setups past this turn, and I want to make sure that I can go off. Then he's going to set 4 and end his turn, and I think, oh shit. This definitely means that it's Froges. So we're going to go ahead and Twin Twister. We hit D-Barrier and Morella. D-Barrier, of course, very good against me, and glad that I got it. Lost Wind, similarly good against me, and that's going to be a big problem in upcoming turns. We'll go ahead and normal summon this Vyon, use its effect to send a Shadow Mist, use Shadow Mist effect to add a Bubble Man to our hand, set this E-Call, special summon Bubble Man, and then use Masked Change. I figure blowing up all of his spell and traps probably wins me the game, or at least forces activations, and what do you know, there are the activations. So he's going to go ahead and use Lost Wind on our Masked Hero Darklaw, and then we will E-Call our way into a Bubble Man, and then use Vyon to banish the Bubble Man in order to get a Poly and make a copy of Abyss Dweller. Now this, of course, will set the Lost Wind, but I'm figuring that that's probably good enough. I don't attack in just because I don't really want to give him a grave setup when I figure I can use Darklaw next turn, and I kind of want to bait him into like making a rank 2, because if he can only make one, I can just activate Solemn Strike. I've also activated Abyss Dweller here to make sure he can't Ronin afterwards, which I think is probably the right move. During my turn, things get a little bit hairy. I'm going to use Upstart Goblin and draw into a Summoner Monk like a complete sack, go into a Shadow Mist, use Shadow Mist effect to get a change, and I'm going to go into Utopia here just because I've engineered some sort of lethal. He's going to use Bewildering Wild on Abyss Dweller. I will chain Abyss Dweller, I mean just in case, and then get in for 26, 12, 850, 2500, and then use Mass Change as a combat trick for an additional 2400. So we're back with the deck, and I mean, it's different. I guess I'll preface a discussion of the power level with two specific claims. First, this deck is incredibly powerful in its own right. The playmaking potential of Vision Hero Vyon is almost unparalleled in Yu-Gi-Oh! I mean, this thing felt like Zodiac Radfear in a lot of games. And second, at least for the time being, I think this is probably the close to optimal version of a Vision Hero Vyon Masked Hero build. I tried some cute little builds with Blazemen and different fusions, but honestly, this was the best by a lot. If you're not making Zolkin with Vyon, you're probably doing this. So, I guess we should talk about the inevitable comparison between this and the big brother that will constantly outperform it, Totally Awesome Heroes. I think the subtle differences in the playstyles of these decks, despite containing a lot of the same cards, are incredibly important. This deck makes Darklaw way more infrequently. One of the most powerful control tools in Yu-Gi-Oh!, Masked Hero Darklaw, is something that routinely feels kind of inaccessible for this deck. While Totally Awesome Heroes, I think, has like a 95% opening Darklaw rate, this deck certainly does not. There are a lot of games where I feel like I just never get to make Darklaw, and I just kind of have to hope that Absolute Zero is enough. However, what it trades off for in losing Darklaw, it gains in incredibly powerful fusions like Absolute Zero and much more consistent Bahamut Shark setups. Certainly one of the things that I hated about old Totally Awesome Heroes is routinely you could open like 3 traps and a Tin Goldfish and a Goblinberg and just have to pray that a Rafflesia would cause you to not lose the game. This happens much less frequently in this deck. It is so painfully easy to set up incredible plays just by drawing Vision Hero Vyon that it almost feels impossible to brick. Having said that, the setups that you create, while they do routinely include a Totally Awesome, are much more susceptible to board wipes. They're much more susceptible to linear play from your opponent since you don't have any Darklaw to interact with them, and they're much more susceptible to basically every single deck strategy in the game because the lack of macro Cosmos for you means your opponent basically gets to use their graveyard as their hand. Certainly some inclusions that made this deck a lot more potent were the Miracle Fusions. I really liked the ability to go into 2 copies of Absolute Zero instead of just 1. The Form Change actually performed in a lot of games, and of course, the one of Goblinberg really pulled its weight in a lot of hands where I unfortunately opened just Shadow Mist and a Reinforcement of the Army and thought, well, I guess I can just roleplay Totally Awesome Heroes here and hope things work out. All in all, it is actually a quite interesting deck. I think it deserves its own playtesting and is potentially a very powerful and fresh new take on the existing archetype that has been floundering, at least for the last couple of months. So that's that. I hope you enjoyed my bitter, vengeful take on a deck that has bricked for me just one too many times in the last couple of weeks. If you like the videos that I make and want to see me play the decks that I make on this show on stream, feel free to check me out on twitch.tv/monobluetron every Monday and Wednesday from 9:30 a.m. to noon Eastern Standard Time. Link is in the description. And if you want to see me play a certain deck or archetype on a future episode of this show, let me know in the comment section below and I will do my best to accommodate you. Otherwise, I'll see you Thursday.